As Citizen Kane began to take shape, RKO assigned a unit art director, Perry Ferguson, to the project. These storyboards were produced by Ferguson, and clearly, Wells followed them very closely in the shooting of Kane. In June 1939, the third part of the creative team arrived in the shape of the celebrated cinematographer Greg Toland. Wells had always wanted Toland on the project. He'd heard of his flamboyance, his originality, and of his reputation as the fastest cameraman alive. Toland had previously made his mark with the maverick Hollywood directors, Wyler, Ford, and Hawks. And he made it known that he'd like to work with a talented and unorthodox newcomer. His influence on Wells and on Kane was decisive. Sequences began to be designed to display Toland's unconventional shooting angles and virtuoso camera movements.
Number 9180.
I can remember when they'd wait all day. If Mr. Kane says.
Nativity.
You better get going.
Wyatt Florence, 1921.
I've got it. All right, next. Take a picture of that.
Hey, can we come down?
Hurry up, we're leaving.
Okay, here we come.
How much do you think all this is worth, Mr. Thompson?
Millions? Anybody wants it?
Well, at least he brought all this stuff to America.
What's that? Another Venus. 25,000 bucks. That's a lot of money to pay for a dame without a head.
The banks are out the block then, huh?
Oh, I don't know.
This is the old RKO scene dock. And still here, astonishingly, are the statues that Orson Welles used as Kane's private art collection, the loot of the world. It only took Welles a few months to master the cinematic technique that you've seen in that magnificent crane shot in the Great Hall of Xanadu. If we go back to it, you will also see how he brought with him from his days in radio and theater the practice of overlapping conversations and choreographing his actors in a totally fresh and unconventional way.
Hey, look, a jigsaw puzzle.
We got a lot of those.
Burmese temple and 3 Spanish ceilings down the hall.
Yeah, all in crates.
Oliver Scott's castle over there, but we haven't bothered to unwrap it yet.
I wonder, you put all this stuff together, palaces, paintings, toys, and everything. What would it spell? Charles Foster Kane or Rosebud?
Gee, 11:30. Shows are just getting up. People are going to nightclubs and restaurants. Of course, we're different because we live in a palace.
Welles was the director, producer, and co-writer of Kane. And he'd also decided to play the central character himself. When he made Kane, he was 25 years old. The character of Kane ages from a young man to a decrepit invalid in his 70s. This transformation became the responsibility of an unqualified young man working as a sweeper of hair in the RKO makeup department.
I was so elated to find that he was coming to RKO studio. And I made all kinds of plans and to see him and so on. And I had the opportunity. And Orson went around seeing in every department. He wanted to acquaint himself with movie making. I had a little corner all to myself. And in that place, I had clay, and I had my tools and everything else, and I would spend as much time as I can creatively, because it was important. Orson saw me playing with noses and ears and things like that, and he wanted to know if I could completely change his face. I said, sure. So he said, you're absolutely sure? I said, I'm absolutely sure. So what do you have to do first? He said, and I said, I have to take an impression of your head, the whole head. He liked the idea, and when we got the materials, he came in, and he sat down in a chair comfortably, and I covered him up, everything cooking. After I got him covered and so that he couldn't move, I asked Bill Allen, whom I was more friendly than the rest, to please read Fantasias Miller, which is a story written by a very famous writer. I can't think of it, but Fantasias Miller had some very interesting things, and I thought Orson should hear it.
The Kingdom of Evil by Ben Hecht. He is a gigantic man with a large head. His face is expressionless. When he looks at me, he seems made of wax. Yet he is stronger than 100 men. 100, I write. There is no limit to his strength. Again, we face him. He regards us, and we grow weak. He is like a monster that walks on the edge of a dream, calm, waxen, towering. It is impossible to approach him. I think as we stand, is he alive? What power surrounds him? See, we are all trembling before his eyes. A sense of puniness overcomes us. I can almost remember him, as if I had caught a glimpse of him moving through the annihilated streets. Yes, there's something familiar about this monster.
I made a cap to cover his head. And I disliked very much the idea of a man having a cap on his head, pushing his forehead like this, and with rubber over here. And all he does, he goes like that, and now he releases his face underneath, like I'm releasing now, for instance, and it doesn't go back like that. It goes back very slowly. What happened is that when I stretched this thing, I put it on with elastics. It's attached to him, so there's a whole series of elastics there. If he goes like this, it comes down like that.
Oh, sure, you give me.
This was so new that he let me go further and further in this.
You're in a tent, darling. You aren't at home. I can hear you very well if you speak in a normal tone of voice.
You never gave me anything in your whole life. You just tried to buy me into giving you something.
Susan!
If you weren't qualified in those days, how come the studio let you do Orson Welles' makeup?
Because they didn't think he'd ever make a movie there. The rule was, if anybody's production department goes by, don't act. Don't sit, don't do anything. Smoke cigarettes and talk. And that's exactly what they've seen. So they put in a spy. They put in a spy. His name was another makeup artist. I'm not going to name him because he will sue me for the truth. And the first assistant director was a spy. So the makeup artist would tell the assistant director would run up and kiss somebody's ass upstairs. I'm sorry, the way I talk it because it's exactly what they did.
Wells encouraged all his key technicians to experiment and improvise. Linwood Dunn had been working for 10 years on visual effects for RKO pictures like King Kong and Flying Down to Rio. It was he who introduced Wells to the optical printer.
He used it like a paintbrush, and that was fine with me, except he was asking for things that I'd never done before, and they were not feasible, and they were not going to look good, such as a zoom on top of a zoom, and the quality would be bad. However, he had enough power at the studio to okay the money and the time it would take to do these things, and so I was happy to go ahead, and I learned a lot on it, and most everything he wanted came out all right. For example, even in the library where we have the gal sitting on the bench and the base of a statue that says Thatcher on her left. So he said when he was editing, well, I'd rather start up on the statue and just pan down and then back, just like it was there. And they said, well, there's no statue on the film.
You didn't have a statue on the set?
Oh, no, just the base of it. And so I had a statue made about 2 feet high. Well, I made a straight shot of that, and then on the optical printer, I made a motorized pan down from it, and then a pan from the scene of the girl, and then matched it with a traveling split screen.
Under which you may inspect certain portions of Mr. Thatcher's unpublished memoir.
And so many of the devotees of Citizen Kane couldn't believe that those things were done, and I could go on and on, like in the opera house, Comingore singing on the stage, and the camera going up into the wings, and the 2 men up on the platform reacting to her singing. And Wells said, well, I want more travel, like we're going way, way up there. So we built a miniature and made a split screen and panned onto the miniature and then off the miniature up to the scene above and fitted it in between.
The new regime at RKO proclaimed a new motto: showmanship instead of genius. It was, of course, a perfectly overt reference to Orson Welles. The new boss at RKO was Charles Kerner, who had run their chain of movie theaters but never produced a picture. Even so, his regime was to be one of the company's most successful financially, and under very special circumstances. There was a war on. In Part 5 of Tales from Hollywood, we look at the upsurge of patriotism in the early 40s and the somber mood that set in once the war was over.